Okay, my topic to talk today is risk assessment and management in the food industry. For me, my name is Jintapanati Watana. I'm finished the PhD in toxicology from Mahidol University International Program. The outline to talk today is begin with the introduction, which is the risk analysis, risk assessment, risk management, and risk communication. I will clear in topic one by one. A risk analysis is defined as a process consisting of the three components. Is the first is risk assessment, risk management, and the risk communication. The risk analysis is defined as a process consisting of three components. Is first is risk assessment, the second is risk management, and the risk communication. The first component of risk analysis is to identify the risk associated with the safety of food, that is, conduct a risk assessment. The second component is to develop and implement strategies that management or reduce the identified risk of unsafe food. And the final component is a risk analysis is inform the order of risk and management practice associated with the food safety, that is a risk communication. The risk assessment is defined as a qualitative or quantitative scientific-based process consists of hazard identification, hazard characterization, exposure assessment, and the risk characterization. These figures show the all process. We begin with the risk analysis and the three process. The first is risk assessment. In the structure and scientific process, we compose of the four process is hazard identification, is a toxic or not, and after we know that it's a toxic, we use to hazard characterization in those response assessment plotting to see the no L or low L. No L is the non-observed dose, is those that you did not see the adverse effect, but the low L is the low dose that the effect of the body. And we evaluate the exposure assessment. We combination the data consists of the chemical, substance, and biological agent in food, and data is quantitative of foods consumed in a region. What is the sensitive population and the effect the allergen or not. And finally, we use the all data to characterize that is risk or not risk. After we evaluate the risk assessment, we evaluate the risk management by selected policy or control option to prevent and climate or reduce that the risk is to acceptable level. And if we set the policy or the methods we use to communicate to the community to interact and exchange the information, option, and the risk among of the stakeholders. This is the process of the risk analysis. They have a various types of risk assessment, but they separate in the six types. The first is food safety risk assessment. The second is the microbiological risk assessment, and the third is the chemical risk assessment. The fourth is the pest risk assessment, is to manage the animal that affect the food or the agricultural product. And the fifth is ecological risk assessment, they affect the ecology or not. And finally is the general risk assessment process. we use too much to manage the chemical in various countries in the world. What's the standard protocol for risk assessment? I example only the food safety is the Codex, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency or US EPA, International Plant Protection Convention, OECD, and the World Organization of the Animal Health and Crime. This is the example for the standard protocol of the risk assessment process that you can find and you see. If they affect the human, the one source, the big source that you can use the protocol is the WHO or the World Health Organization. Before we talking the process, I have some words that talk and explained before. The first is hazard. Hazard is a source or the situation with the potential for harm in terms of human injury or ill health, damage to the property, damage to the environmental, or the combination of these. The risk is the chance of something happening that will have a negative effect or the adverse effect represents that they affects the human or animal or not. And exposure is the state of being exposed to contact with something. Why we use risk analysis to protect the health of the consumer, to organize a food safety control system. The third is to be used to set the standard and measure based on data and scientific evidence. What's the risk assessment? The first, we determine the scope of assessment. Is it physical, chemical, or biological? The second is limits such as the variable or the uncertainty factors. The third, try to use the quantitative data more than the qualitative data. I will talk in next slide what is the quantitative or qualitative. The information is transparent. There are records and documentation. Try to use the data has a homogeneity of variance. It represents that the data is not different too much or not highest or lowest. And the data belong to normal distribution. It's the effect when you use the parametric to use the statistic to evaluate of all data. Is effect or non-effect. There are the interaction or communication between the risk assessor and the risk manager. They use the multidisciplinary, it means represent to use more than one knowledge, such as you choose the toxicology, the biochemistry, biology, pharmacology, or every process. The quantitative or qualitative is represent the qualitative is in the statistics they separate into types, the nominal scale and the ordinal scale, such as the gender, the region is represent that are right or wrong. Is your conclude that one such as you have a male or female, you cannot change. The data is used to calculate by the proportion or ratio, and the quantitative data is mean that the age, the height, the weight, the income is can use or measure by the some instrument such as the tall, the weight of the animals. These figures can represent in the various level. You can use the parametric to calculation of this data, and if the separate by the genetic data, the qualitative is inheritance by the Mendel law, but the quantitative is used the multiple gene. The hazard identification is the identification of biological, chemical, or physical agent capable of causing the adverse health effect and which may be present in the particular food or group of food. This is the principle of the toxicology. You can interested what is the toxicology involved. Every part in toxicology is involved the risk assessment. I can talk that's the hidden agenda or the top of iceberg of the toxicology is from definition is the risk assessment. The toxicology means that the physical, chemical, or biological that's produce the adverse effect the body. The adverse effect is mean that it may be affect the disease to the final is the death. The biological such as the bacteria, virus, parasite, or the mold. We can conclude that it's the pathogen or infectious disease that they affect the human. The chemical is such as the pesticides. The process of the chemical you may add the such as the acid or the base to effect of the food, the drug that's used in the animal or the products, and some chemicals such as the starch or antibiotic may be affect the allergens. The physical is means that the something that not biological material or living organism or the chemicals such as the bone, the bugs, the metal, the hairs, and the glass in the process, including the radiation. If we talk about the contamination in the food. Everything is a toxic depend on those. It comes from the Paracelsus. It includes that all substances are poison. It depends on those. If we hazard or unhazard, we can investigate by using the lethal dose 50. If they don't have a data, you may set up by yourself by the acute toxicity testing by yourself. Its represent is very low milligram per kilogram. It's very toxic, such as the botulinum toxin or dioxin. The Hershey character is the qualitative or quantitative evaluation of the nature of adverse health effect associated with the biological, chemical, or physical agent which may present in food. For chemical, a dose response, if you plot about the dose-response relationship, you may understand that they affect are they toxic or not. If I talk to you first, if we don't have a data of the dose, you use the acute toxicity testing. Acute is mean that the chemical that you have, the rat or animals, and they can kill that 50% in 24 hours. And this figure shows the toxicity testing that you use to investigate the dose and they toxic or not in all the toxicity testing. Is composed of acute, subchronic, chronic toxicity or affect the reproductive of the animal or not, affect the animal development or not, affect the eye or the skin irritation or not, and they have sensitive or they have allergic or not. They affect the from change the reaction or not, and we use the fate of the chemical and the behavioral tests. This show the all toxicity testing. These figures show if you plot about the dose of the chemical and the response, they have some dose that I talked to you first is the NOELs. It's non-observed level. It means that the dose that you cannot affect the adverse effect, and the low is the lowest effect. This data is very important because they can specific dose that you can eat some chemical in every day and they did not affect the body. They use in the pharmacology, in the therapeutic dose, the dose that the drug can affect or not. But the dose response curve is used almost chemical except the carcinogen or teratogen. This means that in every milligram of the chemical that induce the cancer, they can induce. And this figure shows the drug safety or the chemical safety. If you use the fruit supplement or the drug, they has effective dose 50, that the 50% of the animal or the human, that's the drug can affect, and the therapeutic dose. We use the therapeutic dose 50 and dietary dose 50 to therapeutic index. That's the use. They range between the effective or the very toxic effect dose, and they can range that the drug are safety or not. The exposure assessment is the qualitative and the quantitative evaluates that the biological, physical, they affect or not. These figures show that they have three routes of exposure in the human. Is the main route, such as the inhale is by your breathing, ingest is by your eating, the normal is your contact. These are the three main routes of exposure. The factor that affect the exposure assessment, you have the questionnaire, diary, and your environmental monitor, personal monitor, and biomonitoring. That's the effect. What's the sensitivity of the population? Then you are use the predict model. You have know that the fate of the chemical or biological that in the body, they can change. They may be toxic or non-toxic, and body try to withdraw of some chemical. The human activity, human exposure, and finally the important factor is the kinetic. And you estimate that how many population or individual or the target organ. They have a sensitive population is the elder and the younger. What's the difference and the effect? Is the answer is the pharmacokinetic. It means that every chemical that you have passed the full process is absorbed to the body after your administration by your breathing, your eating, or your contact, and the distribution to the every systematic in the body. And biotransformation is mean that the chemical that you eat try to easy to dissolve in the water, or the conjugation, the enzyme in the liver. They have the words that the liver is the organ of the toxic detoxification of the chemical. And because they compose of the phase 1 and phase 2 enzyme, that they change the chemical that when you administration in the body, and easy to excretion or withdrawal by the urine or the bile or the sweat or the saliva or the feces. And the uncertainty factor, they interested about the immunology system. They can call that the some chemical that's the allergy and the affect the body is the uncertainty factor. They call the Pandora box. The Pandora is the ancient Greek that she have accept for everything, but she don't know that what's in the box. This they try to comparison with the Pandora box. And all the data we use to estimate, including attending uncertainty and probable occur and severity of known or potential of produce adverse effect health or not, what type of the sensitive population by the hazard identification, hazard characterization, and exposure assessment. We can conclude that another one important factor is underlying mechanism. You know that the chemical, physical, or biological, watch the underlying mechanism and watch the target organ of the system, such as this is the aflatoxin B1 in the cereal or the beans. That the contamination then didn't affect directly because they need to biotransformation. I talked you first, or kinetic by the cytochrome P450, and they change the structure to the epoxy and directed binding to DNA and become the carcinogen. This the example. After your assessment, the risk management is defined as the process. This string from the risk assessment and wage policy, alternatively in the consultation with all interested parties, considering risk assessment and other factors relevant for the health protection of consumer and for the promotion of fair trade. Practice, and if you need selected appropriate prevention and control option. The World Health Organization have tried to management about the water. They have a standard protocol or methods that we can management. The 4 components of risk assessment framework can summarize. The first is the primary risk, preliminary risk management activity comprised of initiation process. It includes to estimate the risk profile facility considered in issue with the particular content and provide as much information as possible to guide the further action. As a result of this process, the risk manager may commission a risk assessment and independent scientific process to inform decision making. The second is evaluation of risk management option is the weight of available options for managing a food safety issue in light of scientific information on the risk and the other factor and may including reaching a decision on an appropriate levels of the consumer protection. Optimization of food control measures in the term in their efficiency, effectiveness, technology, feasibility, and particularly at selected point throughout the food chain is an important goal. A cost-benefit analysis could be performed at this stage. Every policy and every have a cost. They have a cost benefit, a cost adopted a practice to lower. They try to use the low budget experiment problem and weigh the benefit of avoid or loss result from the problem if nothing was done to reduce the likelihood of the problem. The quantifying the beneficials of managing a risk consider both the probability of the problem occurs or arises if the risk is not managed, the magnitude or size of loss if the problem that occurs or arises if the risk is not managed. The cost of adopting a risk management practice or strategy is considered to be known or determined with some degree of certainty. It is the beneficial component of a cost-benefit analysis and uncertain because the frequency of the magnitudes of the problem occur is not known with certainty. And finally, is the implementation of the risk management. Its decision will usually involve regular food safety measures, which may include the HACCP process. The HACCP uses the critical points. They try to see more critical point and flexibility in the choice. Individual measure applied by the industry is an desirable element as long as overall programming can be objectively chosen to achieve the stretch goal. Ongoing verification of the application of food safety measures is essential. And finally, we try to monitoring and reviewing the gathering and analysis of the data so as to give an overview of food safety and consumer health. Monitoring of contaminating is in food and foodborne disease. Surveillance should identify new food safety problems as they emerge, where there is the evidence that require the public health goals are not being achieved. Redesign of food safety measures will be needed. And after we assessment and management, we try to communicate of the community is defined as the interaction exchange of information and option throughout the risk analysis process, considering hazards and risks, risk-related factors, and risk perception among assessment, risk manager, consumer, industry, and the academic community and the other interested parties, including the explanation of risk assessment finding and the basic of the risk manager decision. Consumers require access to adequate information about the potential hazards and appropriate precautions to be taken in the final preparation and serving of the food. In addition, consumers need to be aware and understand the food safety control measures implemented by the government and interested in consumer health. Community provide the public and the result of expert scientific review of the food hazard identification and accessible of the risk to the general population or to specific target group, such as the infant or the elderly. Certainly, people such as the who are the immune deficiency, allergic, or nutrient deficiency require the particular information. Communication provide the private or the public sector with the information necessary for preventing, reducing, or minimizing food risks to access both safe level through system of food quality and safety management by either mandatory or voluntary means. It also provides sufficient information to permit the population with the greatest level of risk, any particular horses to assert their own option for achieving even the great level of the protection. We can summary all parts that I talk is we begin with the risk analysis process is the ideal that the risk of unsafe food will never be eliminated, so business will focus on the horses to pose the greatest risk and strategy of practice that provide the greater reduce in risk. Risk assessment is careful study of the firm current product practice to determine whether the practice may lead to an unsafe food product or food-related health problem. Hazard identification is the process assess the risk, chemical, physical, or biological of any form attack that may render food unsafe. The risk management is business strategy and the practice that minimize the likelihood that the food product is rendered unsafe as a result of the business activity. Some of the practice may be mandated, others may be adopted by the firm after a benefit cost analysis. Cost-benefit analysis is a numerical analysis to identify hazards that pose the greatest risk of unsafe food and the business practice that result in the greatest reduction of the risks of the producing an unsafe food or to create the food-related problem. The business practice that is used to reduce the risk of unsafe foods is the cost-benefit analysis. The value of reducing the risk is the benefit. The food business would be expected to direct its eliminate resources to the business practice that produce the great value of reduced risk. Restarted, the firm would direct its resources to the activity that offer the lowest cost-benefit ratio. Risk communication may likely involve consumer information education about the product and its safe handling. And second is public explanation and reassurance when a problem arises. It may be better to refer to point 2 of risk communication and crisis communication. This figure shows the reference of the data that I talked today, and thank you very much for your time.